Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
A pogrom is brewing. That was a headline that I saw a little while ago, and at the time people thought, maybe that's a bit harsh, perhaps over the top. Not any longer, especially not since May 21st, 2025. That was the evening that 2 staffers from the Israeli embassy were shot to death in cold blood in Washington, D.C. The murderer who carried out the shooting was a young radicalized man named Elias Rodriguez. He yelled out, "Free Palestine," as he was arrested. You wanted a globalized intifada? This is what it looks like. Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name is Brian Lilly, your host. The conversation you're about to hear was recorded on May 8th, long before Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram were shot and killed, leaving a cultural event in the American capital. That act of terror has obviously and understandably put a chill on the Jewish community around the world. The day after the shooting, I was at Toronto City Council as they debated a bubble zone bylaw to protect mostly Jewish schools, daycares, and synagogues. It would protect others, but that's the intent. And even the day after that shooting, Hamas supporters were there at council to oppose the idea, which thankfully, in the end, did pass. Later that day, at the annual Action Gala run by the Canadian Jewish Political Action Committee, the shooting and rampant anti-Semitism were frequent points of discussion. We've had more than 18 months of people marching in the streets, screaming about freeing Palestine, chanting that there is only one solution, intifada revolution, praising martyrs. So what we saw with this shooting shouldn't be surprising. Disturbing, yes, but not surprising. We will see more of this unless we change, unless Western societies begin confronting this rot of anti-Semitism, unless we fight back against the very illiberal ideas these radicals continue to spread. Well, that's what the discussion with Brendan O'Neill was about and why it's still relevant. Brendan O'Neill is someone who's written extensively on this issue. We've spoken to him in the past on the Full Comment podcast about other issues. But in this episode, we wanted to bring him in to talk about how we fight back. He is, of course, the editor and columnist at Spiked in the UK. He's also the author of the book, After the Pogrom, 7th of October, Israel and the Crisis of Civilization. Here is our conversation. Brendan, thanks so much.
Hi, Brian. How you doing?
Well, I'm a little depressed when I think about this, and I try not to think about it. I don't have to think about it as much as some of my friends and colleagues. You know, Brian Lilly and Brendan O'Neill aren't exactly 2 Jewish names. But as my friends like to say, anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It's a problem that the rest of us have to deal with. How are you feeling? I mean, you wrote your book last fall, or it was published last fall. But in my view, things haven't gotten better. They seem to get quieter for a little while and for a couple of months during the winter, but it's back in full force and full rot as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I think that's right. It comes in waves, I think. And at the moment, I think it's getting worse. I mean, that's a depressing way to kick off a podcast, I'm sure. But that is the reality of it. And you think it's going to peter out eventually. You think, how long can this new anti-Semitism go on for? You know, it's been 18 months now since the 7th of October pogrom. You know, people surely have got fatigue about hating Israel as much as they do, but actually it just seems to get more and more intense. And I find it incredibly depressing, incredibly worrying. You know, one of the reasons I wrote my book, After the Pogrom, is not because of what happened on 7th of October, but because of what happened on the 9th of October. And on the 9th of October 2023, there was a celebration of Hamas's pogrom outside the Israeli embassy in London. People were dancing in the streets, they were playing pop music, they were burning the Israeli flag. And I saw that and I thought to myself, look, people are celebrating the murder of Jews. On the streets of London in 2023, people are dancing because Jewish people were raped and murdered. And that's when I knew that the response to 7th of October was going to be pretty awful, that it was going to reveal something rotten about our societies and about the state of Western civilization itself. And that's been proven right. We've had that shown to us time and time again over the past 18 months. And as I say, it's not going anywhere. It seems to be getting worse.
This is a very different anti-Semitism, Brendan. It's not the KKK of days of yore. It's not neo-Nazis. And while I'm sure you hear some of this in the UK as well, I've heard it in the United States. It's definitely point of discussion here in Canada. Well, this is what we get for mass immigration from certain countries where hating Jews is just part of the culture. And as someone who's gone to a lot of these protests, funny enough, starting on October 9th, 2023, I've seen some of that. Yes, there is a portion of either the participants or the leadership who definitely are immigrants to Canada, some refugees who come from Islamic cultures where being taught to hate Jews is just part of the culture. But there's also a large contingent of people who would have described themselves as progressives for most of their adult lives. And so it's a strange mixture of folks coming together. Is that what you're seeing in the UK as well?
Oh, absolutely. There's an unholy alliance between kind of often quite upper middle class so-called progressives, people from the leafier parts of society, along with radical Islamists, some of whom are recently arrived immigrants, but others of whom their families have been in the UK for a long time, but they've become radicalized recently around Islamist ideas, the Islamist ideology. So the marches we've had in London and other parts of the UK since 7th of October 2023, they've been a mix of those two types of people. And it's the weirdest alliance, I think. It's so ridiculous. It's a suicidal alliance between so-called progressives and these radical Islamists who would throw half those people off the top of a tall building given half the chance. You know, it's best summed up by the ridiculousness of Queers for Palestine. And I make the point in my book that if Queers for Palestine were ever to go to Gaza, their pronouns would be was, were pretty damn quickly. And so we have the exact same alliance. And I think the thing that unites these two strange, very different groups of people is firstly an extraordinary animus for the Jewish state, a hostility often towards Jewish people who they see as privileged, who they see as problematic, as a group of people who've got more advantages than the rest of us, and therefore they need to be punished in some way. But also what unites them is just a weariness with modernity itself, and a kind of anti-Enlightenment sentiment, a rejection of the values of Western civilization. You know, we know that radical Islamists hate Western civilization. That's their driving force of their ideology. They think the West is the great Satan and everything we've done is horrible. But increasingly, progressives in the West itself hate Western civilization itself. These are people who've been educated at universities in which, you know, you're discouraged now from reading the classic texts because they're all too white and they're all too male. You're encouraged to see countries like Britain and America and Canada as having been born in the sins of colonialism or slavery or some other form of racism or the genocide or First Nations communities. You're constantly encouraged and in fact educated to hate your own nation, to hate your own history, to hate your own civilization. And I think that's what's drawn these progressives, especially younger ones, into this deathly embrace with radical Islamists, which is that both of them find themselves feeling incredibly hostile towards Western civilization. And I think that's precisely what makes this movement of Islamophobia so dangerous, not just for Israel and Jews, but for the West more broadly.
Well, can Western civilization, the civilization that we all built coming out of the Enlightenment, can that stand without confronting this? I be blunt, I think it's a cancer on our civilization. Can we stand and remain Western, liberal, democratic civilizations if we don't confront this, if we just allow it to continue in the name of some misguided view of, well, we're all equal and we have to allow everything? No, not all cultures are equal. Not all viewpoints are valid. Horrible viewpoints like antisemitism deserve to be condemned. We're not getting that in much of Western civilization. I want to talk about the Trump administration, what they're doing in a moment, but so far in Canada, until recently in the United States, and so far in the UK, I don't see the pushback from our society's leaders.
No, neither do I, sadly. And I think you're right. Western civilization can survive. I think it can withstand a lot. It's an extraordinary achievement, the greatest achievement of humankind so far. But not if it fails to confront this cancer, as you aptly describe it, then it won't survive, or at least it will at least be incredibly weakened. It's already quite weak as things are. So it does need to confront this problem. And anyone who knows anything about modern history, or even history going back 800, 900 years, they should know that when anti-Semitism rears its ugly head, it's indicative of a broader moral rot in society. It's never just the return of racism. It's never just a new racial ideology. And in fact, I really dislike it when people on the left say, I'm against anti-Semitism and all other forms of racism, because anti-Semitism is not just another form of racism. I'm against all racism. Call me old-fashioned. I don't think you should judge people by their national heritage or their skin color. I think you should judge them as individuals. But anti-Semitism is something different. Anti-Semitism is an ideology of evil. It is an ideology that searches for the nefarious elements in society that are causing society's downfall. So who do they blame it on? They always end up blaming it on the Jews. So the Jews were blamed for the crop failures in medieval eras when things went wrong or the climate spun out of control. Lo and behold, there would be a surge in Jew hunts and pogroms. They were blamed for Germany's economic failures after the First World War. They were held responsible for throwing Germany down the toilet of history, and then they were blamed and punished severely for that accusation. And what we have now is a situation where Israel, the Jewish nation rather than the Jewish people, I think it's a very it's not a distinction that is very fine anymore. But the Jewish nation is now held responsible for the world's ills, and I'm so taken aback by the extent to which all the things that were once said about the Jewish people are now said about the Jewish nation. So the Jewish people were once seen as a very disruptive force in society. Now that's said about Israel in relation to world affairs. The Jewish people were once seen as a bloodlusting people who had a peculiar interest in killing children. We now hear that about Israel all the time. That's the cry of the left. Israel kills children. And in fact, there was a march in Essex here in England a few weeks ago where pro-Palestine marchers went through a Jewish area carrying dolls covered in fake blood and bloodied shrouds. So you think to yourself, right, it's 2025 and the Jews of England are still being accused face to face of killing children. That's the blood libel that first emerged in Norwich in England 900 years ago, and it's still here. So the rehabilitation of that Jew hatred, the rehabilitation of those poisonous old prejudices, I think is reflective of Western societies quite drastically losing their way.
Well, what is really striking me in the last little while, Brendan, is that layered on top of the hatred of Israel and the hatred of Jews is that they don't even hide that they support the terrorist groups who say they want to kill Jews. And think of the Irish band Kneecap that went to Coachella and then quickly had their visas withdrawn and had to leave the United States of America. They were up there denouncing Israel, but also chanting things like "Up Hezbollah," "Up Hamas." Maybe to them it's just a continuation of "ooh ah up the Ra." Maybe they're old time IRA supporters who decided that Hezbollah is the next group to back. But I hear that in the streets of Toronto as well. I see that in the protests that happened just about a year ago in Vancouver, where they shouted "Death to the USA," "Death to Israel," "Death to Canada" at a pro-Hamas event. They're not even pretending just to be pro-Palestinian or denouncing Israel. They are openly in support of terrorists and terrorism. And this is something that is, as I say, a cancer that will eat away at Western civilization and our academic institutions. It will, if it's not dealt with. I mean, how much faith can you have in police if they are doing two-tiered policing?
Yeah, well, exactly right. We have a situation where on one of the anti-Israel marches here in London, a bunch of radical Islamists were chanting for jihad against the Jewish state. They were saying jihad, 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 more jihad against Israel. And some people complained to the police. They said this looks like an incitement to violence. And the police said, well, jihad has many different meanings, and we've consulted with an expert in Islam, and he said it can mean a personal quest or in self-improvement. It doesn't have to mean holy war. And you just want to grab them by the scruff of the neck and say, listen, when you have radicalized Islamist youth on the streets of London weeks after 7th of October chanting for jihad against the Jewish nation, we know what that means. They want more pogroms. They want more 7th of Octobers. They want more Hamas attacks on the Jewish state. But the police kind of made excuses for it, because I think they're probably quite scared of that element in society as well, or they're certainly...
When you live in a place where you can be arrested for Facebook posts...
Exactly. And it's that two-tier policing as you describe it. There's currently a woman in jail here in the UK. She was sentenced to 31 months for writing a post during the Southport riots last year. That's when there was an outburst of violence on the streets of England, across England, after the Southport massacre, where 3 girls were killed by the son of Rwandan immigrants. And there were riots about this. People were incredibly angry, and the riots were very ugly. They attacked mosques, they attacked hotels that have immigrants in them. There's no excusing their violent behavior. But some people were imprisoned not just for violent behavior, but for things they posted on social media, including this woman, Lucy Connolly, who wrote a horrible post. By her own admission, it's a horrible post. She said, burn down all the hotels. I don't care. I'm sick of all this. And she got 31 months in jail for writing that. As you say, we then have Kneecap getting up on stage and saying, up Hamas, up Hezbollah, so openly singing the praises of neo-fascist militia, both of which were founded with the express intention of killing Jews and destroying the Jewish state. Also, Kneecap said at one of their gigs, the only good Tory is a dead Tory, kill your local MP. And what we have is a situation where the cultural elites are bending over backwards to defend Kneecap's right to make those kinds of statements, while turning a blind eye or openly supporting the imprisonment of people like Lucy Connolly for her outbursts on social media. I mean, it goes beyond two-tier policing. It's two-tier morality. It's a different morality system depending on what your views are, depending on whether you are politically correct or politically incorrect, depending on whether you are praising people who kill Jews or praising people who are attacking Muslims. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. It's an extraordinarily racially divisive form of two-tier policing and two-tier morality. And if Britain doesn't sort this out, we're going to be in big trouble.
I can tell you that I've heard from police here that they've been told, well, don't mess with that group shouting what they are in the streets. they may cause trouble and fight back. But the Jewish counter-protesters, it's fine to arrest them because it won't cause trouble.
Yeah.
That's direct from a police officer. Frontline, those are the marching orders. And I feel for the frontline police officers because most of the ones that I talk to don't see things this way. They don't like that. But I don't know what it's like in the UK, but here, the saying is always, well, politicians can't direct police. They're independent. I don't buy it because I've seen it too often. The tone comes from the elected officials, like the mayor in Toronto's case. And the police chief knows, well, we have to report to city council, and the council won't back us if we go in and start arresting people for flagrant violations of the law that have been happening at these protests since October 2023.
Yeah, it's very similar here, and it's incredibly worrying. I mean, the kind of spectacles we've seen on the streets here in Britain, just carnivals of hatred, carnivals of anti-Semitism. I went on a couple of these demonstrations to observe them, to see what was happening. I went on one, it was a few weeks after 7th of October. I was there for 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, I saw someone who was waving the Israeli flag being chased down an alleyway and kicked. And I saw a group of young radicalized Islamists chanting for the return of the army of Muhammad to kill all the Jews. I saw that in 20 minutes. So I kept thinking to myself, what are all these supposed progressives seeing? What are they marching by and turning a blind eye to? And you see placards, of course, comparing Israel to the Nazis and saying that the Jews are the new Nazis, which, as the great Howard Jacobson says, the reason anti-Israel activists always mention the Holocaust or the Warsaw Ghetto, they never compare Gaza to any other war in history, just to what the Nazis did. And he said the reason they do that is to wound Jews with their own pain, to inflict on Jews the painful memory of their own people's suffering. It is a form of racial targeting and demonization. That's why they use those completely inappropriate Holocaust analogies all the time. So you see that on these demonstrations too. And officialdom, the police, everyone else, they just kind of nod along, or they say, it's fine, leave them alone. We've even had a situation here in Britain where the police have told Jewish people to hide the symbols of their Judaism when there is a demonstration on. So in Scotland, a police officer told a man to hide his Star of David necklace, and he was told, you might trigger the protesters. We also have a situation where Jews in London have been advised to stay out of the centre of town on days when there are demonstrations taking place. I'm sorry, but if Jews cannot go about their daily business, if they cannot wear their religious insignias and paraphernalia, if they cannot wear their kippahs, if they feel they cannot do these things in public, then we have become institutionally anti-Semitic societies. And for me, one of the most depressing things that happened after 7th of October, where I live in London, close to where I live, there's a school called the Jewish Free School, which is a secondary school. I guess you guys would call it a high school. An excellent school for Jewish kids. And the Jewish kids at that school were given permission by their head teacher to remove their blazers on the way to and from school, which usually children who wear school uniform are not allowed to take the uniform off until they get home. But they were given permission to remove their blazers on their way to school so that no one would know they were Jewish kids. And this was days after we saw the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. So there's a sickness in our societies, and it's a kind of two-way sickness between the people who are creating this culture of hatred and hysteria and bigotry, and officialdom, which doesn't know how to deal with it and too often turns a blind eye rather than, as you say, standing up for the values and virtues that are being explicitly attacked by these people.
We've had protesters show up outside of a Jewish daycare center, outside of a Jewish senior center in Ottawa, Jewish-owned businesses targeted, and pretty much a blind eye. We've just gone through our most recent election, and Thankfully, a lot of the bigots and anti-Semites were not elected, but more than 300 signed the Palestine Declaration denouncing Israel. And, it has become normalized in the Socialist New Democrat Party and the increasingly socialist Liberal Party of Canada for these views to be held. We need to take a quick break here, Brendan. When we come back, we've thoroughly depressed the audience so far. Let's see if we can talk about how we can turn back the tide. More in moments.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox disinfecting all-purpose cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes.
Like Doc slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
Impact confirmed. The Slayer has been activated.
Demonic threat level increasing.
Hold the line!
All the power of hell cowering before one man.
id Software presents Doom, The Dark Ages. Available now on Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and PC.
Rated M for mature.
In golf, precision is everything, on and off the course. PGA of America chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business for smooth operations and seamless transactions. Together, we enhance ticketing and concessions for better fan experiences from gate to green. This is pro-level efficiency. This is PGA of America with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew until you had really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
Brendan, you wrote about After the Pogrom. I mentioned off the top that, Casey Babb's just written this great piece for Free Press saying that there's an ongoing pogrom. I know Canadian Jews, young and old, who are looking at leaving. We've got the fourth largest Jewish population in the world after Israel, the United States, and France. We're number 4, and people are saying they don't feel safe. Is there a way to push back? It's not popular to say Donald Trump is doing anything good these days. That is not a popular opinion in this country, but his pushback on anti-Semitism, I think, has to be applauded, both with his stand with the universities, but also saying, look, if you are here on a visa and you're participating in these so-called demonstrations that turn violent, whether it's Columbia, University of Washington, what have you, you're gone. You do not have a right to be in this country. I think we could be doing that in Canada. I'm sure you could be doing that in the UK, not you personally, but the government. Beyond that, how do you push back on this?
I agree. I think Trump is doing good stuff. And in some ways, it's not even necessarily the policies he's enacting on campuses or wherever, because you can see the potential for those to go in problematic directions. I do understand the arguments made by friends of mine in the US that it's essential to attack anti-Semitism, but we've got to be careful not to undermine freedom of speech into the bargain. And I understand those concerns, but it's more the fact that he's speaking so plainly on this problem and that he's speaking so loudly about it. And he is saying, listen, we don't want anti-Semitism in this country. We don't want anti-Semites to have free reign on campus. We don't want them to be harassing Jewish students, which, by the way, happened at Columbia and happened at Harvard. At Columbia, during the Gaza encampments there last year, Jewish students were prevented from moving about freely. Some of them were told to f*** off back to Germany. There was a placard that referred to Israel as the pigs of the earth. Now, people can try and convince me that's anti-Zionism if they want, but to my mind, that's just anti-Semitism. Ivy League campuses became hotbeds of anti-Semitic action, and I think Trump is absolutely right to do something about it. And that the Democrats fail to do anything about it, apart from make some woolly denouncements every now and then, is a real indictment of where the left currently is. In the UK, Kemi Badenoch, who's the leader of the Conservative Party here, she's made some pretty good noises on this issue too, and she has said we should not be welcoming immigrants who are anti-Semitic, or we should be concerned about immigrants coming from anti-Semitic parts of the world. And she said, we do not want to import those hatreds because our Jewish community is very important to us. I think she's absolutely right. I think if you hate Jews, or if you have a hatred for Israel that is disproportionate to anything Israel has ever done, then there's no reason we should have you in our country. We don't want that kind of apocalyptic racial hatred in our nation. We've got enough of it already to tackle without bringing in more. So we do need that more confrontational approach. But I think the starting point, you ask, is it possible to push back? It absolutely is possible, but it takes a lot more. It will take a lot more voices speaking up, a lot more people speaking out. And the people I'm least inclined to forgive at the moment are the people who are just not saying anything, who know that something rotten is afoot, who know that something has gone badly awry, who know that there's racism has returned to our societies, but they don't want to talk about it because they fear cancellation. They fear no longer being invited to those literary soirees. They fear their friends who have a fashionable hatred for Israel turning against them or stopping inviting them to things. So it's that kind of cowardice that really needs to be challenged in order that there can be more voices denouncing this turn in our societies. Until that happens, I don't think things are going to get much better.
Yeah, I can tell you that we've seen some, at our provincial level, several provincial governments have instituted increased education in the elementary and secondary school systems on anti-Semitism. They have sponsored groups to go around with buses with a permanent display inside that the children can go in and learn about it. And I think that is all good. And I think we need to see more of that. I've already mentioned the policing, but we've got a society, you said fashionable anti-Semitism. It is completely fashionable, and it's casual. And so we see events happen, and a lot of political leaders will instantly run to social media and put up a post denouncing Islamophobia.
Yeah.
And then an anti-Semitic act happens, and there's silence from these very same people. Again, the conservatives in this country tend to be a bit better, but I don't think it's a partisan thing. I think it's a societal issue. But on the progressive side, the so-called progressive side, we have just seen this become the default position. I think we would have had a very different discussion about this issue maybe 20, 30 years ago on where anti-Semitism came from on the political spectrum.
Yeah, it's so true what you say about the speed with which they will denounce Islamophobia and the slowness that they will talk about anti-Semitism. That's very striking here in Britain as well, and across Europe, in fact. And actually, even prior to 7th of October, whenever I did a media debate about anti-Semitism in this country, especially left-wing anti-Semitism, because the Labour Party here, when it was run by Jeremy Corbyn, had a huge problem with anti-Semitism, a huge problem with express open hostility towards Jews and, of course, towards the Jewish nation. And I did lots of media debates, and every time I was up against a left-winger, whenever I mentioned anti-Semitism, they would instantly say, what about Islamophobia? What about anti-Muslim sentiment? It was like this kind of tick they had. It was almost like a Tourette's syndrome phenomenon where they couldn't hear the words anti-Semitism without saying Islamophobia. And you even had a situation where it became very difficult, and it's still very difficult, to talk in Europe about the problem of Muslim anti-Semitism, which is a very serious problem. There are surveys show continually in Britain and in other European countries that anti-Semitic ideas have a stronger hold on certain sections of the Muslim community, not all of them, of course, but certain sections of the Muslim community are more likely to believe anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, more likely to think that Jews are in some way problematic, and of course more likely to hate Israel. But you can't even talk about Muslim anti-Semitism anymore, and if you do, you'll be accused of Islamophobia. So you have a situation where it's become Islamophobic to talk about anti-Semitism. It's become racist to talk about anti-Jewish racism. This is the kind of slippery Orwellian semantics that we're faced with, where even to raise the problem of anti-Jewish bigotry is to risk being accused of bigotry yourself. So they kind of lock you into this bizarre Kafkaesque world of twisted linguistics, where it becomes almost impossible even to talk about the problem that we face. Here in the UK, a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, a school teacher showed an image of Muhammad to his school kids in a discussion about free speech and blasphemy and so on. And there was such a feverish response to him showing this image that he went into hiding, and he is still in hiding. He feared for his life because he's still in hiding. His name has not been released. He still is completely and utterly under the radar because he still fears for his life. Because Muslim fundamentalists turned up at the school, protested, threatened to kill him, and he was let go and he ran away with his young family.
Meanwhile, we're in the middle of an actual conclave for the Catholic Church to choose a new pope. And what's one of the most popular streaming movies right now, a movie called Conclave, which is interesting in that it does show the politics that go on behind the scenes to elect a new pope, but then has the surprise ending where the person they elect is transgender.
That's right.
That would not happen with a movie about Islam, or people would disappear. Wow. That is...
Yeah, and it's so extraordinary because you're absolutely right that a movie like Conclave couldn't be made about Islam. And in fact, a movie was released here in Britain a couple of years ago called The Lady of Heaven, which depicted Muhammad. And there were protests outside every cinema showing it, and every cinema capitulated and removed that film. So we are kowtowing to Islamo-censorship all the time. And that is giving a license to the fundamentalists. It's greenlighting their bigotry, their censorious bigotry. And it's intensifying them, and it's making them stronger. It's such a foolish thing to do. Whenever you capitulate to extremists, you embolden the extremists and you weaken the virtues of society itself.
And there is a direct link between that and the anti-Semitism that is growing.
That's right. So what you have is a situation where a country like Britain, and this goes for other European countries too, have spent the past 10 or 20 years emboldening Islamist extremists, telling them essentially they have free reign, that their religious views are so perfect that they should be defended from criticism at all costs. There should never be a joke about Islam. There should never be a caricature of Muhammad. No mere mortal should be allowed to criticize Islam because that's how wonderful the religion is. That's essentially what our societies say when they adopt the ideology of Islamophobia. And what that does is it emboldens those groups of people who come to think of themselves as unquestionable, uncriticizable. And anyone who does criticize them is instantly denounced. And of course, if you embolden the Islamist imagination, you're going to give rise to anti-Semitism because that's a central part of the Islamist imagination. And so we now find ourselves in this terrible bind where we've essentially greenlit Islamist fanaticism for so long. We've got a left and a progressive set that thinks it's wonderful to hate Israel. In fact, that's the only thing that gets them going. Islamophobia is the only idea that really gets their juices flowing. And lo and behold, we end up in a situation where anti-Semitism returns with a vengeance to our societies. We made this bed for ourselves, and getting out of it and fixing the world around it is going to be a pretty difficult thing to do.
At many of the protests, I've not only heard people praise Hamas and Hezbollah, but they've carried portraits of some of the dead terrorist leaders, like Sinwar.
Yeah.
Or the spokesman for Hamas has been profiled as well. That is, as we've discussed earlier, open support of terrorism, and yet most in the media, in this country anyway, won't call it what it is. And they still call these pro-Palestinian protests. There are lobby groups set up to tackle any media person who dares to call a spade a spade. Is it becoming more difficult for you to speak up? I mean, I know you have been following your writing for years, pretty fearless. How is it for the rest of the media in the UK?
It's just, there's a lot of cowardice in the British media. And, you know, we have the BBC, which is a disaster, really. On this issue, it's been disastrous. And
our CBC is the same. They won't use the word terrorism unless someone else says it.
Yeah. That's the exact same with the BBC. They refuse to call Hamas terrorists unless they're quoting someone. You know, I was talking at a synagogue in London last night, the night before we're talking on this podcast, and people were talking about the BBC, and I made the point that what the BBC has done over the past 18 months is unforgivable, because every single night, literally every night, it has, on the news, it has pumped into millions of homes the idea that there is only one war taking place in the world right now. Forget Sudan, forget Myanmar, forget Ukraine, they don't matter anymore. There's only one war taking place in the world, in Gaza. It's the worst war that has ever happened. That's the impression they give all the time. The atrocities in this war are apparently unparalleled in human history. We've never seen anything like it. That's the message they send all the time in their emotionally manipulative, distorted coverage. That's really unforgivable, because even if you have viewers who don't particularly care about this issue and are not pro-Hamas, but they might not be pro-Israel either, what happens, you have this drip effect where people are constantly told that this is the most barbaric thing that's happened in decades, if not centuries. It's as bad as the Holocaust. It's Nazi-like. It's, you know, the BBC shows footage of the dead of Gaza all the time, really bloody stuff they show us. They don't show us that from Sudan, where vastly more people have been killed in war over the past 2 years. They don't show us the starving kids in Sudan because they're not...
No Jews, no news.
No Jews, no news. And it's so the BBC has created this impression for the people of Britain, because the BBC is extraordinarily influential. It's created this impression that not only is this the only war in the world, but it's the worst war in the world. And Israel is a sick, backward nation for doing what it's doing. And so the media, much of the media gives us that impression. Of course, there are pockets of common sense, and you have, obviously they're spiked, and spiked is firmly taken the line that Hamas needs to be destroyed. It's a pox on the Holy Land. It's a pox on the world. There's the Telegraph. There's the Spectator. There are outlets that are publishing pro-Israel stuff and really calling into question the anti-Israel hysteria. But in the kind of broadsheet press, in the BBC, in the liberal media, all of which is very influential, especially on the political class itself, there is this impression that Israel is a modern day manifestation of fascism. That is the impression we're given, and I think it is utterly unforgivable that libel against the Jewish state has become so fashionable in media circles.
It's been a depressing conversation at times, Brendan, and I'm not sure that we've solved it, but I do appreciate your voice continuing to speak up. And I encourage everyone to keep reading, follow Brendan on social media, but also read his work in Spiked, and check out After the Pogrom, 7th of October, Israel and the Crisis of Civilization. Thanks so much, my friend.
Thanks, Brian.
Full Comment is a Post Media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please hit that subscribe button. Leave us a comment or a review, and tell your friends about us. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I promised you. But the late 1960s, you have members of the Montreal police who can spend their entire shift rushing from one FLQ bombing to another. Here's how New Year's Eve 1968 played out for Robert Cote, a member of the Montreal Police Bomb Squad, which put him at the forefront of fighting the FLQ during this period. He was supposed to be at home with his wife, who had just miscarried twin daughters. But instead, at 11 p.m., he's called out to Montreal City Hall to investigate a bomb that had just gone off. He's en route with sirens blaring when he's told, actually, don't bother with the exploded bomb. There's an unexploded bomb on the other side of City Hall you have to defuse. And then, right after snipping the wires on the City Hall bomb, Cote has to speed west where a third bomb has just exploded outside a federal building.
The bombing started in April and May of 1963. That's when the first bombings took place. And the mailbox bombings were the most famous part of the whole thing, which was basically on the Thursday night and Friday night leading into the Victoria Day weekend in 1963. So, and initially they started attacking these symbols of federalism, federal institutions, whether it was the Montreal Post Office or Revenue Canada. But the bombings escalated as time went on in terms of the size of the bombs and the powerfulness of these bombs.
If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.